What's the exclusion rate like at your school? Do you frequently exclude students or do you keep them in your school? The question really that we're thinking about today is, do schools get too much pushback on exclusions? And so before we kind of just go and answer that, I want to sort of dig a little bit deeper into why students are getting excluded in the first place and kind of open it up from there. So the most common reason cited for students being excluded from school is persistent disruptive behaviour. And we should probably just outline that there are different types of exclusions in school. Okay. You've got exclusions where students are isolated from the classroom. They're still in school, but they're not in the classrooms they would already ordinarily be in for a variety of reasons. And then they get put back into their classrooms after a period of isolation, which could be just a lesson, it could be a whole day, something like that. Then you've got exclusions where students are not allowed in the school and they have to essentially work from home and they're not allowed on the school premises. But that's, again, just for a short number of days. And then they're brought back into the school and they carry on as they did before, probably with the same behaviour, but we'll get into that. And then you've got the other types of exclusions, which are known as permanent exclusions, where a student is then permanently excluded from their school and they have to then go and find another school to attend. So there are sort of three levels of exclusions in school, and there are nuances between those three. You've got all sorts of things like managed moves and everything else, but we're not going to get into all that. We're going to keep this really simple, and we're going to be talking about exclusions where the students are not really allowed in the school, either for a short period of time or permanently. That's really what our focus is going to be on today. So back to the reason for this happening. So the most common reason, as I've already said, is persistent disruptive behaviour. I guess the first question, Craig, is, do we think that behaviour is actually getting worse in schools or not? And I'm aware that it's been a couple of years since you have been full time on the chalk face, but just reflecting on your early career, mid career, later career, and the trends and perceptions and thoughts you've had, do you think behaviour is getting worse in school?
Oh, that's a loaded question. And it's a nuanced answer, so feel free to interrupt me if I go off on one. Are students generally worse behaved now than they used to be? The easy answer is, oh, yes, you hear that a lot. I wouldn't want to teach now. You hear that from other parents. I'd never want to teach. Students are far worse. Kids are far worse. I think it's way more nuanced than that. There is definitely, I'm going to sound really old now, there's definitely a general change in society, but don't think that's through the individual fault of the students. With the advent of social media and instantly consumable entertainment, attention spans as a country, as a population, have got shorter and shorter. There's a lot more need for instant gratification, the doom scrolling, the Facebook, the feedback, the fact that students consume media in 5-7 second chunks. So the general attention span of us as a population has got less and less as our access to media has gone from one national television channel to 50 to everything you could ever want on your phone. And that means attention spans are less, and that causes a knock-on increase in keeping the attention span and concentration of students is harder. So that's had a knock-on effect. There's also, and this isn't necessarily in my 17 years of teaching, but going back, I can speak about my parents, and they talk about teachers had a level of respect simply because of who they were. You got respect because you're a teacher. You respected people in authority. Teachers had automatic respect. Policemen had automatic respect. Firefighters all had respect. Now that's not there so much anymore. And I don't think there's a problem with this. You now have to be consistent in your management, in your how you deal with students, and you have to earn the respect of students, and that comes with a better bond. But there's not that automatic, oh, you must respect me because I'm a teacher. So there are challenges. The question you asked me is, has behaviour got worse over the 17 years? And the third nuance I want to throw in is, even over the relatively brief period that I taught, I mean, 17 years is not even 2 decades, I saw a considerable decrease in the amount of funding available to support students. And I'm going to say it, dare I sound very woke here, right? Students with multiple and complex barriers to learning.
Here we go. Here we go. We said we weren't going to be contentious or political. Here we go. Come on, roll it out.
Because I know people go, what do you mean multiple and complex barriers to learning? You mean the kid's just a little... I'm not going to say it. And because I remember our head of behaviour strategy in our school saying, when a student makes misbehaviour in a classroom, it's because they've made a bad choice. And you need to educate them on the consequence of their choices and the actions they have. Like, oh, here we go. No, they were just being an idiot. They swore at me. There's no excuse. Right. Because, yes, but students don't simply misbehave. They misbehave because there are multiple barriers. And some of those we might not be able to overcome, but it is your job to try and help them overcome these barriers so they can access the education. And whereas I rolled my eyes, and a lot of teachers might be rolling their eyes now, the students not badly behaved, they have multiple and complex barriers to learning. It is true that we have far less money in schools to help students who aren't as advantaged as maybe I was. I came from a well-supported background. I had supported parents, and not every student has the same benefits or privilege that I had growing up. And with the lack of money that's going into schools, what I saw during my time, this is the point I was getting to, when I started, I probably had general comprehensive school. During a timetable over a week, I maybe had 5 or 6 learning support workers across my week. I'd see one in this lesson, one in that lesson. By the end, I don't think I had any learning support workers. Still had a learning support department, but the money was less and less. So, of course, more students that needed that extra support weren't being supported. Students that before it would have gone to a specialist school, an educational establishment really designed to help them, those places are becoming less and less. So more students are being put into mainstream education, and it's not appropriate for all students. So is it a surprise that disruptive behaviour increases and is on the rise as a result of more students being put in an education system that's not fit for purpose and has less support to help them with the barriers that some of them do genuinely have? So the easy answer is yes. Over the 17 years, I saw behaviour got worse, but I don't think it's simple as saying, oh, well, kids are just getting more disruptive. That's a very long answer, but I think you probably expected a long answer because it's not a simple one. I don't simply think kids are getting worse.
Yeah, that's the point, isn't it? Kids aren't necessarily getting worse. They have different expectations put on them today than perhaps we had when we were at school. But were there disruptive students when I was at school? For sure. For sure, right? And I think it probably hasn't changed as much as we think it has, but other things around us have definitely shifted.
Right. That's what I was getting at. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I wasn't surprised you gave me a nuanced answer, to be honest, because it was a slightly unfair question in the sense that what does the evidence say? The actual evidence says, yes, it has, and no, it hasn't, depending on the lens, and what it is that you're looking at. So it's a very mixed picture in terms of the actual investigation into the question. So I'm really not surprised that you would answer that the way that you did. And I completely agree with you. I think anecdotally it feels like it's worse, but I don't think it is worse. I just think that the other mechanisms that were there around teachers are different. I'm not going to say whether they're better or they're worse, but they are different. And you did outline some of them, and I agree with you. Things like societal expectations have changed, less trust in the public bodies. I mean, we see that with things like less trust in politicians, we see it with less trust in the police, we see it, with less trust in the health system, and we see it obviously then as less trust in the education system as well. And some of that is justified, to be fair, but some of it isn't. This idea that there's a greater acceptance today that the problem is with the teacher and the problem isn't with the child. The problem, my child is not able to access the curriculum because the teacher can't teach. And we often hear students saying very negative things about their teacher, and they email us, don't they, and say what they think of their teacher. And
we have to politely not respond or be very diplomatic.
Yeah. And there's no way, I think, 20 years ago, a student would have the audacity to push back against their teacher in the way that they do now. And we kind of see that again in society, don't we? As adults, it's become more acceptable to challenge authority. And it's a good thing. In a healthy democracy, I guess it's a good thing. But we're talking about young people here that also need to not know their place. That's going too far. We do have to kind of earn respect. I believe in that. But we should also expect that respect if it's earned, and it should be earned quickly. I think that's really kind of where I'm going with it. And you also mentioned things like, greater mental health challenges that perhaps are brought about because of social media and overspill into schools from instant messaging and all those sorts of things that are currently hot potatoes. And you kind of touched on, but maybe we're labeling some of these mental health problems as excuses, because if you give a kid a label, then it's sort of like half the problem solved, when they didn't need a label at all. There are bigger things at play here. I don't know. You also touched on this idea that you come from quite a privileged, I mean, you're not privileged, Craig, but you're middle class, right? And you've had opportunities. Your parents have set you up for life. And
I think that's what I was saying. Yes.
Yeah, you've had that upbringing, haven't you? Where your parents had expectations of you in terms of how you behaved and how you treated adults. Is that fair?
Yes, and if I had misbehaved at class, or which I never did, but on the odd rare occasion where something would go back, I knew I couldn't whinge to my parents about it. Well, blah blah blah. Well, they must have had a good reason. You better go and apologise to that teacher, because if I phone in and have to deal with it, you'll be in trouble. I'm like, whoa. They, by default, would back the school up, make sure I do my homework. What have you got this evening? Let's have a look at your contact book, it was called. Let's look at your contact book, see what homework you've got. All right, we'll get on with that, because otherwise you can't watch that show later. And I'm like, oh. Yes, they were those sort of parents.
Didn't forge the signature in your homework planner like I did.
I wouldn't have dreamed. Oh, you were the naughty kid. I wouldn't have dreamed. So I think that's what privilege is definitely not fair, but yes, and of course I took that for granted as just the way, and I certainly
we kind of assume, don't we, that all students have that, and it was only when I became a teacher that I suddenly realised I might be the exception and not the rule here. Actually, not everybody is brought up with the same experiences and demands and challenges that I've got from my parents. And some parents do go too far. I want to say that as well. I do think children should be children, but if there's anything that's unequal in our society, it's definitely the experience that students get at home, right?
Yeah. And absolutely. And let's not start parent bashing and blame it on parents. It's not, because this is all nuance. It's not, there's good parents and bad parents make bad students. There's the answer. Hey, it's not as simple as that either. No. I mean, the pressures on adults and parents these days compared to 20, 30 years ago. I mean, we could go off on a whole one, but let's not, cost of living crisis and everything else. The pressures there are enormous. And at the same time, you're trying to raise a child or maybe multiple children, in the best way you can. That's not easy. Let's not underestimate. I'm not a parent myself, but bless you, you've got two.
I am.
Yeah, you are. That's not easy either. So
no, and I can tell you, from my personal experience, my wife Carol and I, we made a decision when our first son was born that Carol wanted to be at home, right? I don't want people out there thinking that I dictated what happened in our house. Not at all. Not
You
at
absolutely
all.
don't, Dave.
No,
You
no.
don't
If
dictate in
anything,
that house.
it's probably the other way around, if I'm 100% honest. Like all good men who have wives, right? But the point I'm making is that Carol wanted to stay at home with the children, and she wanted to give up her career because she saw her career as giving her children the best start in life so they could have a good career and good outcomes. And that was a personal decision. What it meant, though, is financially, we struggled. And even to this day, I mean, people think that we earn loads of money here at Craig and Dave, and we really don't. But even today, I am struggling much more financially than you are. And we've talked about this, we're open about it because of the life choices that myself and Carol have made. And we have made an awful lot of financial sacrifice in order to do what we want to do for our children. And I'm not saying out there that it's bad parenting if you go out to work, because we were fortunate that I earned enough to be able to support the family. Yes, we didn't have a lot of spare cash as a result, but I was able to cover all the bills. There's lots of families out there, they can't cover the bills with a single income.
This is it. Some parents simply don't have the choice. You're absolutely right. And if it's like, no, we both need to work because, as we said, we talked about the cost of living, and that's a serious thing. Rents, prices, mortgages, interest rates back on the rise, gas, oil, electricity, council tax. Everything is going up. You've got 1, 2 children. Both parents probably have to work. It may be that one's also got a part-time job as well on top of their full-time job. Those parents, not through any want, it's back at the end of the day and it's like, oh, I need help with this. You need to sign this. I need to do that. And so I just need to sit down on the sofa for 2 minutes because tomorrow I'm going to get up and do this. And they're not, it's not the same capacity. And that's understandable to ask the child how the day was, check their contact book, ask about homework, respond to this, go to that parents' evening, this play, that football. The pressures are immense on the family these days. And I think this is why I was saying earlier, the response is so nuanced. It's difficult.
Yeah, and it's not easy talking with teenagers, right? I've recently had teenagers myself, and they are not easy, even as a teacher, to interact with them at home because the relationship is different to being in school. Even for me as a teacher, it's often difficult to engage with my teenage children. And so I can imagine that for, a parent that is trying to cover the bills, they need a bit of free time and space for themselves as well to just function as a normal human being. And then, having the grumpy teenagers that don't want to communicate with you is really, really hard, right? Really hard. Anyway, I want to pull us back to the question because this is all relevant in terms of, why are things the way they are? But let's pull us back to the question, which is, do schools get too much pushback on exclusions? So we've talked about why exclusions happen because of persistent disruptive behavior. They also happen because of one-off incidents and things like that. But it's the common reason that's cited is persistent disruptive behavior. So we wanted to kind of go down that alley and talk about it a little bit there. But coming back to exclusions themselves, is there too much pushback for exclusions? So I guess we might think about what do we mean by pushback in that sense? And so just again, from my own personal experience, but also the experience of lots of other teachers out there, we are increasingly being pressed to justify decisions, okay? You can't just say to a child, right, you're not welcome to come in tomorrow. I'm going to phone your parent, tell them you're not coming in. There's increasing pressure to justify that decision. And there are a greater number of parents that are making complaints to schools following official complaints processes. And parents are demanding greater independent scrutiny of these decisions. That isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it is putting more pressure on the schools. And there are a lot more legal challenges than there ever have been in terms of exclusions and whether they're justified and how they're managed and whether a student gets reintegrated or not, things like that. So I just wanted to explore that a little bit, what your experience of exclusions in your school have been.
Yeah. Well, that is definitely something I noticed, an increasing pushback over sort of the 17 years of exclusions, complaining about students' increasingly persistent, ongoing disruptive behaviour, and needing to provide more and more evidence and being told, well, you've got to do this, Craig, because again, not a lot of people will be aware of this. I think it's probably typical of most schools, certainly also mine. There'd be an exclusion panel which met, and that had a couple of governors on it, a senior member of staff, and they would look at every exclusion and the evidence as well. I don't want to be controversial, but I want to be honest, because from my own classroom experience, when persistent, ongoing, disruptive behaviour, and I'm calling really disruptive, it would sideline the lesson for 10, 15, 20 minutes, which is the bulk of a lesson these days, by the time you got them in and got them out and all the rest of it.
Persistent, that's the other thing. We're not talking about one-offs.
No. And I followed behaviour management systems. I believe I had good classroom techniques. I'd build rapport. I wouldn't simply scream at a student and say, I'd try to get in there and understand. But it just persists. And I'm sorry, but I'm just going to say it now. It's going to nerd out. It's a Star Trek reference, so I don't know how needy you are, but the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the one. It's a Leonard Nimoy Spock reference. Yeah, but I do believe the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the one. But in that case, no, because it's not just me you're disrupting; it's the learning and the teaching of all the other students in the classroom. And if I've tried my hardest and I've used all my skills as a teacher and I've followed behaviour management systems and I'm receiving pushback, which you would, they've got to stay in, we can't do that. We've done the managed move, but that school won't take, now we've got to find someone. I'm not interested in your excuses. And I realised those barriers became more and more for SLT, and they were up against pressures and Ofsted coming in, sure, exclusion rates, we need to have got them down. I just want them out of my classroom, because for the last few weeks, I have not been able to teach effectively, and the other 29 students have not been able to learn. I think that's a frustration that me and a lot of chalk-faced teachers felt.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. We do often forget the impact that it has on all the other students and their education. And a lot of parents of those other children would be horrified that even happens to start with, and then even more horrified that child is welcomed back into the classroom again and again and again, and even more horrified that there isn't some kind of master intervention, some holy grail, some magic key, some fairy dust that enables you to fix that child, because that child is also entitled to an education. Just because they have persistent disruptive behaviour, they don't have any less of an entitlement to education than the other 29 students in the class. But those 29 students and their parents do also have the entitlement, and they're not getting it because of that one child. And it's really, really tricky in a sense, isn't it? You're right that there has been a lot of pressure on schools to reduce the number of exclusions. And Ofsted kind of will look at the exclusion rate and see it as an indicator of potentially a poor school if exclusion rates are too high. But it's interesting that schools really fall into three camps, don't they, I suppose? You've got those schools that say, we have standards and we are going to make sure that all our students adhere to those standards, no exceptions, and they have really draconian discipline policies and they exclude a lot. But they get really high results, really high attainers as a result of that. Then you've got the opposite end of the spectrum of schools that they're so frightened of Ofsted and from, whoever the other bodies are, that they daren't exclude anybody, and the poor teachers just have to put up and shut up to a certain extent, and sometimes they end up on strike. But more often than not, they end up moving schools, and that sort of disrupts the education as new teachers have a high turnover in a school, and that disrupts the education of all the students there. And then you've got those sort of most of the schools in this country are in that middle ground where they have strong behaviour management policies, they are backed up by the senior leadership team, but they face all the challenges that we've already discussed. So you're absolutely right. But I don't think we can do an episode like this, though, without saying what the impact of permanent exclusion is, because it feels like such a simple solution. You've got disruptive behaviour, it's persistent, teachers are at their wits' end, parents would be horrified that the rest of the class aren't getting a good educational experience. The students themselves are frightened about their results and they want the other student kicked out. We shouldn't forget, though, the impact on that student, because I would say
the student being kicked out, you mean?
Yeah, and it is a cliche, I know, but it's this idea that behavior happens for a reason, right? And I know it's a cliche, behavior happens for a reason. There's a reason for that behavior, and just permanently excluding a student does not fix the problem.
I don't think it's a cliche. Yeah.
But it fixes the problem for the other 29 students in the class, I suppose, is where we're going with that. But the impact on the individual, I think we should just lay this out, right? For the student that is excluded, it does interrupt their learning. You could argue it's already interrupted. They're interrupting it themselves, but it does. They do have lower academic outcomes as a result. They do have reduced future opportunities as a result, because it goes on their school record and potentially on references moving forward when they eventually leave school. They are at a higher risk of criminal activity and getting involved in gang cultures and county lines and all sorts of other things. And then it does perpetuate this cycle of disengagement and disadvantage. And so, they become the parents that then put that behavior onto their children, etc. So let's not underestimate the impact that this has on the individual. I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think it's a cliche at all. I think it's really real, and this is why I come back to the other side. I was a huge believer in the pastoral care and support of students, and some of my most fun bits were when you really got to know the students and help them. And by that, yeah, the good students are great. I'll always have fond memories of the great students, but some of my best memories are when you get through to a student who is generally having problems. Now, I don't want to get amazingly dark, plus I must be very careful about confidentiality, so I won't go into specifics. But, I remember a particular student, for example, who was well known. You talk about him in the staff room, everyone were like, oh, yeah, just a bad kid, always disruptive. It was a member of my tutor group and I'd known them for years, and I'd seen it get worse and worse. And so without getting into any specifics, the situations was horrific. And I remember deliberately trying to take time for that student as the tutor to talk to them on the rare occasions that I would have them in school and really engage with them. And the sort of stuff I discovered would, I think, shock virtually most people. We're talking about only one parent because the other one is in jail, for example. There's a different partner in the house every other week who, the other existing parents is with. There are drugs coming into the house. There's no, and it goes on and on and on. And when I discovered all that and I really spoke to them, they said a sentence to me. I don't even want to give away a gender. They said a sentence to me. Said, so why are you even here? I said, and they went, it's the only place I get some consistency. They hated school because why should that pupil with those barriers, and that's why barriers to learning is not like a woke phrase. Why should a student with those barriers to learning really be interested in what I have to teach them about an algorithm? But school provided them somewhere that was safe and they didn't want to go home. Now, when you understand that and you get under the skin of that, you realize one of our big duties as a school and as teachers is to help prepare students for life, because at the end, they're going to leave compulsory education. And as you said, if we don't get in there early enough and we can't help and we can't intervene and we can't support, then what will happen is that student will end up in a perpetuated cycle. They aren't as advantaged. Privileged was the wrong word, as you said, but they aren't as advantaged as I was with my parents and the same home life. Therefore, if we can't help and support, they will end up perpetuating that cycle. Much more likely that that particular student will end up, committing crimes, ending up in a juvenile facility, going on. And then if they have children, perpetuating that cycle. When you start to get under the skin of some of our worst behaved students, you realise at the end of the day, each of us, especially children, we're only a product of our own upbringing and our experiences and the interactions we have with the people around us. There is a reason that child is acting out or they are like that. It is highly unlikely they are simply doing it for a giggle because they woke up today and went, today I'm going to be disruptive. There's all reasons for that. The problem is with the lack of funding and pressure on schools and teachers being ever increased, there is so less time, money, and effort into finding out the cause of those problems and fixing it. So the easy thing, and I was symptom of this as well, is look, it's persistent and I cannot teach in 29, get them out. But that doesn't help that individual. And that individual may have very genuine reasons they are acting out like that. And on the odd occasion where I managed to really unpick that, so if you remember my tutor group, they'd be like, no one's ever really ever cared or spoken to me like that before, sir. Sir,
Yeah.
there's an underlying level of respect there.
Yeah, I think also that there's a real opportunity now for the new curriculum drafters, because we've got a new national curriculum coming in 2028. And it already feels like it's being straitjacketed for all sorts of reasons. But there's a real opportunity now to make the curriculum really a little bit more fit for purpose. We've discussed on previous episodes whether we thought the sort of reform in terms of the English baccalaureate and an emphasis on academic subjects was the right idea in the past, etc. And it kind of was in terms of, having equal opportunities to high quality education for all, etc. We've talked about that already. But equally, this is an opportunity now to really make the curriculum fit for purpose in terms of thinking about all the different types of learners and thinking about all the professions and things that our country really needs. And when I was at school, Craig, we didn't faff about with fancy names for subjects, right? We had woodwork, we had metalwork, we had cooking, we had needlework, and it wasn't a problem to tell it for what it was, because it was recognized that those skills were skills you needed to have to exist in the real world, to be able to cook a meal for yourself, to be able to weed the garden, to be able to iron your own clothes, those kinds of things. They were seen as important. And I grew up in the sort of 1970s, 1980s, but I look at some old Pathé news clips of education in the 1940s and 50s and even through the 60s. And it's a different world, right? It's a completely different world. But part of me wishes we were there, because if we gave children what they really felt they needed and what they valued, because they could see the real value in the real world, then maybe we wouldn't have quite so many problems, and maybe then we wouldn't have so many exclusions, and then maybe we wouldn't even need to ask the question about whether schools get too much pushback. But for me as a senior leader, I have been responsible for permanent exclusions, and I remember every single one of them, because every one of those children mattered to me. But we had got to a point where I couldn't do any more, and I couldn't ask the teachers to do any more. We had already done everything. We really had. And so, is there too much pushback on exclusions? Yes, I think there is, but checks and balances are important. Go on.
Yeah, I just wanted to add in as well. Some of our older viewers as well will remember the term expelled. We haven't even touched on that today. And my parents said, well, can't you just expel them? I remember my parents now in their 70s saying, can't you just expel them? There's no such thing as expulsion. Expelled was literally when a student was taken off roll and wasn't educated anymore. Even when we get to a stage now where a student is permanently excluded from a school, they legally require to be on roll. So that can't happen until you found them a place somewhere else. And we're not going to go down this whole road because we've already been talking for this 40 minutes, but this idea of managed moves, and it's like, right, so if a school can't simply say, and this is why we're getting pushback, so, oh, we're going to permanently exclude them. Right.
Off-rolling. Not allowed to just
Off-roll.
off-roll.
Yeah, they're not simply off-roll. We can't expel students anymore. They're not fit for education. Go work down the mine. You know, it's not like that. They could go, go work down the pit. No, they have to stay in educational training until 18. And so you can't simply off-roll them. You have to find somewhere else. And as you said, that student's behaviour, if it hasn't been tackled, will probably simply persist in they've got a fresh start.
There was more freedom, though. There was more freedom in the past. When I was a senior leader years ago, we had the opportunity to get them more involved in work experience, extended work experience. So I would have students that, yes, they were still on roll. Yes, they still came to school. Yes, they still did the core subjects, English, maths, science, and maybe another subject that they particularly enjoyed, like design technology or PE or art or whatever it happened to be. Maybe they did a couple of those subjects depending on their interests. But we were able to then make a curriculum so that they didn't have to go to the other ones. They didn't have to go to geography. They didn't have to go to French or whatever it happened to be. And instead, they would go down the road to the local garage and, they would be, fitting tyres on vehicles and doing things like that. And do you know what? They absolutely loved it. They absolutely loved it. And then when they came into school, they were like, this is the rough with the smooth. And actually, I can see now, because I use it at work, I need to know a little bit of maths for invoicing. I need to know a little bit of communication skills in English to talk to customers and talk to suppliers and things like that. I can see the value of this thing. And so I know I need it. I know I want it. And this is going to really help me, because as long as I don't mess up this work experience, this garage is going to be in a place to offer me a job, or they're going to be able to give me a really good reference for me to get another job in another garage. And do you know what? There is nothing wrong with being a mechanic.
No, of course not. I need to use them all the time. My car brakes haven't got a frigging clue.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Anyway, look, we're going off topic.
Yeah.
That probably brings us to a conclusion, Craig. So, do schools get too much pushback on exclusions? I say yes. There is a risk that there's an assumption that schools aren't already doing everything that they can do. They're not already doing their best. They are at the end of the line, but that doesn't mean there shouldn't be appropriate checks and balances in place.
Brilliant. I don't really think I have anything else to add to that final thought. You eloquently wrapped it up. A tricky topic with nuanced discussions, but I've quite enjoyed it, Dave. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this episode as well, and we'll be back soon with another At the Chalk Face. Take care for now. Bye-bye.